They called the ship the Warden, a name bestowed by its jailers generations ago, but in the whispered stories of the old ones, it had another name, the Odyssey. It was a lie Elara clung to in the dark, a secret mythology of a time when the ship was meant to be a cradle, not a cage. The air, thick with the scent of recycled coolant and unwashed bodies, tasted of rust and resignation. Every corridor was a scar of pitted metal. Every deck a testament to a long-forgotten war that humanity had lost before Elara was even born. The victors, a symbiotic race known as the Consortium, were the architects of this slow decay. Their enforcers, the carriers, were hulking, chitinous things, six-limbed and silent, their movements like the patient scuttling of rock spiders. But the true power rested in the pilots, the Aurelians, who rode nestled in a cavity at the base of the carriers' skulls. They were small, almost delicate beings of pale flesh and glowing filaments, their thoughts transmitted directly into their hosts' nervous systems, their will made manifest through alien muscle. Humanity was no longer a species, it was a resource, a herd cultivated within the failing body of its last great ark. Elara was a scrapper, one of the few who still dared to crawl through the ship's forgotten guts, the miles of unlit, unmapped service tunnels and maintenance shafts the Consortium deemed too unstable or unimportant to police. It was a life lived in darkness, her world defined by the narrow beam of her headlamp and the feel of corroded metal beneath her fingertips. She scavenged for spare parts, for overlooked nutrient paste caches, for anything that could be traded for a moment's peace or an extra ration bar. It was a roach's life, and roaches, as her grandmother used to say, knew how to survive the boot. The boot came every cycle in the form of the tithe. It wasn't a tax paid in goods. It was a culling paid in flesh. A carrier, its Aurelian pilot glowing with cold purpose, would descend into the designated living block, and a human would be selected. No one knew the criteria: age, health, gender. It seemed entirely random, which only deepened the terror. The selected were taken to the upper decks, to the labs and processing wards, and were never seen again. Their absence was a void that swallowed hope whole. This cycle, the boot fell on Kyle. He was only 9, a boy with eyes too big for his gaunt face and a laugh that sounded like cracking glass. Elara had known him his whole life, had shared her scavenged rations with him, had taught him how to splice a power conduit without frying himself. She watched from the shadows of a ventilation grate as the carrier approached, its heavy footfalls a drumbeat of doom. Kale's mother screamed, a raw, animal sound that was cut short by the carrier's second limb, which pinned her to the wall with indifferent pressure. Kale didn't cry. He just stared, his small hand clutching a toy ship Elara had made for him from stripped wires and a shard of polished steel. The Aurelian's filaments pulsed, a soft, violet light, and the carrier scooped the boy up. He was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. That night, something broke in Elara. The roach's instinct to simply survive wasn't enough. Grief was a caustic acid in her veins, dissolving the years of cynical resignation and leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated rage. Her grandmother's stories, once a comforting fantasy, now felt like a map. She had spoken of the ship's true heart, a place the Consortium had never found, a command center from before the fall, sealed and sleeping. The Odyssey's soul, she'd called it, a ghost in the machine, Ilara packed a small kit of plasma cutter, 3 nutrient bars, and a flask of recycled water. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. There was no one left to tell who would understand. She slipped into the guts through a loose panel behind the waste recyclers, the familiar darkness wrapping around her like a shroud. This time, however, she didn't stick to the known routes. She pushed deeper, into sectors marked as structurally unsound on the old schematics she had memorized. The ship groaned around her, the sound of a dying leviathan. She crawled through collapsed conduits, shimmied across chasms where entire sections of deck had fallen away into the abyss of the lower holds, and squeezed through pressure doors warped shut by ancient explosions. The air grew colder, cleaner, the scent of decay replaced by the sterile smell of dormant machinery. After hours that bled into one another, she found it. A bulkhead, different from the others. It wasn't rusted or pitted. It was made of a smooth, black alloy that seemed to drink the light from her headlamp. There was no handle, no keypad, only a single, small handprint scanner, dark and dead. The stories had said it was keyed to the original command crew's DNA. A long shot, a fool's hope. Her grandmother was a Maddox, a descendant of the ship's first captain. Ilara placed her palm against the cold glass. For a moment, nothing. The silence was absolute, the kind of quiet that crushes you. Then, a faint blue light traced the edges of her hand. A soft chime, a sound she had never heard before, echoed in the confined space. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the massive door slid sideways, revealing a darkness that felt ancient and sacred. She stepped inside, and the door sealed behind her. The room was not a room. It was a cathedral of forgotten technology, a circular chamber, its walls lined with dead consoles, and in the center, suspended by a web of thick, crystalline cables, was the heart. It wasn't a computer core, as she'd imagined. It was a massive, multifaceted crystal, easily 30 feet tall, pulsing with a barely perceptible inner light. Within its depths, ghostly, holographic figures flickered and swirled faces, star charts, lines of code, all jumbled together like a shattered dream. This was the Gestalt Core, a biomechanical consciousness woven from the preserved neural patterns of the Odyssey's first 100 officers. It was their minds, their memories, their souls, all sleeping in a crystal tomb. At the base of the central structure was a single command chair, and beside it, a small auxiliary console still glowed with a faint, amber light. Ilara approached it, her boots making no sound on the deck. She ran her fingers over the cool, smooth surface. It felt like touching a gravestone. All this power, all this knowledge, and it had slept while her people were enslaved and butchered. "Wake up," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, wake up." She didn't know what to do, what to press. It was alien to her, this technology of hope. Her hand rested on a large, unsmooth conduit that fed directly from the console into the crystalline matrix. Rage and grief surged through her for Kyle, for her grandmother, for the stolen legacy of the Odyssey. A tear slid down her cheek and dripped onto the conduit. A spark, not of electricity, but of pure, white light, arced from her fingers into the machine. The central crystal flared, the ghostly figures within swirling into a frantic vortex. The air crackled, and a voice, a dozen voices speaking as one, echoed not through the air, but directly inside her skull. It was fragmented, confused, A chorus of ghosts startled from their slumber. Signal, breach, where is the fleet? Captain Maddox, where are we? Alara stumbled back, clutching her head, the phantom words rattling her teeth. The light in the core stabilized, dimming back to its soft, internal glow. But something had changed. A single, clear thought, a question, isolated itself from the cacophony and focused on her. It was a woman's voice, calm and authoritative, yet laced with a century of confusion. "Who are you?" Before Ilara could answer, a new sound cut through the silence of the bridge, a distant, rhythmic blare, an alarm, a consortium intrusion alert, echoing up from the inhabited decks below. The power surge, however small, had not gone unnoticed. They had sensed the ghost waking up. She was trapped, sealed in the ship's forgotten soul, with a choir of dead captains in her head and the monsters on their way to investigate the noise. The roach had kicked the boot, and now the whole boot was coming down. The chorus of ghost voices swirled in her mind, a hurricane of 100 years of silent questions. But the woman's thought, sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the storm. "Who are you?" The blare of the consortium alarm was a physical blow, a screech of metal on metal that vibrated through the deck plates and up Alara's spine. Panic, cold and familiar, seized her. Her instinct was to run, to find a dark corner and disappear. But the black alloy door was sealed shut, and the only way out was through the past. "My name is Ilara," she said, her voice a raw whisper in the vast, silent chamber. She stared at the pulsating crystal, trying to focus on the single, nascent consciousness that had addressed her. "I'm a scrapper. I was born on this ship. We all were." The voice in her head was laced with a profound, unnerving stillness, as if it were listening across an impossible distance. "Scrapper. This is the UNS Odyssey, a colony vessel. There are no scrappers. Where is Captain Maddox? Where is the crew?" The alarm grew louder, closer. She could hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of a carrier's footsteps echoing in the service tunnels beyond the bulkhead. "Captain Maddox is dead," Alara said, the words tasting like ash. "He died 100 years ago. They all did. The war. We lost the war." The crystal flared, a violent surge of crimson light that washed over the chamber. The chorus of voices returned, a roar of collective denial and anguish that hammered against her thoughts. "Lost, impossible. Tactical retreat." The Cerberus line held. Lies. The pressure was immense, a psychic scream that threatened to shatter her mind. Ilara squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands to her temples. "It's true," she yelled, her voice breaking. "Look, just look at your ship." The authoritative female voice reasserted itself, silencing the others with a sheer force of will that felt like a physical shockwave. "Show me." Ilara didn't know how, but she knew what the core wanted. It wanted her eyes. She opened them and looked around the pristine bridge, a relic untouched by time. And then she thought of the world outside its walls. She pictured the corroded corridors of Hab Block 7, the flickering, failing lights, the nutrient paste dispensers that coughed out gray sludge, the faces of her people thin, pale, and haunted. She thought of the tithe, of the silent, inexorable march of the carrier, and she focused all her will on the image of Kale, his small hand clutching a toy ship as he was carried away to be unmade. The crystal shuddered. The ghostly figures within its depths warped and changed. They were no longer proud officers on a bridge, but were now specters witnessing a century of decay through a scrapper's eyes. Star charts dissolved into maps of structural decay. Bright schematics of fusion engines were overlaid with flickering, failing power conduits. And everywhere there were the carriers, their chitinous forms and the glowing Aurelian pilots nestled in their skulls, the undisputed masters of the Odyssey. The silence that followed was worse than the psychic scream. It was the sound of a dream dying, the silence of a tomb that has just realized it is a tomb. The female voice returned, stripped of its calm authority, leaving only a core of cold, incandescent fury. They have turned our cradle into a cage. They have made our children into cattle. They will pay for this desecration. A new sound joined the approaching footsteps, a high-pitched whine. A plasma cutter. They were beginning to slice through the bulkhead. "They're coming," Alara breathed, her brief surge of defiance evaporating back into terror. "They'll find this place. They'll destroy you." "This core is shielded," the voice stated, a hint of its former command returning. "But they cannot be allowed to breach this sanctuary. Your presence here had reawakened us. You are the catalyst." "Alara, we will not be silenced again, but to fight. We need a body. We need hands. Yours." A section of the console beside the command chair lit up. A schematic of the surrounding service tunnels appeared, three-dimensional and pulsing with light. A single, massive red icon showed the carrier at the door. Smaller icons showed two more, moving to flank the position. "What can I do?" Alara asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You know the guts of this ship better than we do. We can see the schematics. The power flows, but you know the rot. You know the decay. We will be your eyes. You will be our weapon. Do you see the primary coolant line, designation 7B? Running parallel to this corridor." Alara's eyes widened. "It's unstable. It hasn't been properly maintained since the fall. It's set to blow if the pressure regulators are bypassed." "Precisely," the voice said, a chilling satisfaction in its tone. "The consortium's technology is advanced, but they are arrogant. They have not studied our ship's bones. They see it as a simple container. They have no idea of the power that still sleeps within its veins." The console flickered, displaying a simple interface. A single, glowing rune pulsed on the screen. "The regulators are an archaic system, mechanical, not networked. They cannot be controlled from here, but their emergency purge valve can be overloaded. The access panel is 12 meters from your position, behind a corroded wall plate. You have approximately 90 seconds before their cutter breaches the first layer of the hull." Alara didn't hesitate. She was no soldier, but this was a language she understood. Sabotage, using the ship's own failing systems as a weapon. It was a scrapper's art form. She ran to the wall the schematic indicated. Her fingers finding the loose edge of a plate her eyes would have missed. She tore it away, revealing a recess filled with bundled cables and a small, rusted lever marked with a faded yellow warning symbol. The whine of the plasma cutter was a high-pitched scream. "Now." "I'm here," she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the lever. The carrier at the door is their anchor. The other two are moving to establish a perimeter. They believe they have you cornered. They are not expecting the walls themselves to bleed. The voice was hard as diamond. "When I give the command, pull the lever down, all the way. It will trigger a catastrophic pressure release. The steam will be superheated to 700 degrees Celsius. It will turn that corridor into a furnace. Ilara could feel the heat of the plasma cutter through the deck. A bead of sweat traced a path through the grime on her face. What about me? The blowback will rupture this whole section. We are rerouting structural integrity fields around this chamber. The bridge will hold, but the way you came in will be gone. We will have to find you another way out. Just tell me when. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. The sound from outside changed, a grating shriek as the cutter finally bit through the outer hull. Ilara braced herself. Now, child of the Odyssey, the voice commanded, its fury a palpable force. Show them our ghost has teeth. Ilara threw her entire weight onto the lever. It groaned, resisted, then slammed down with a deafening crack. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the ship roared. A deep, guttural tremor shook the entire sector as a century of contained pressure found its release. She heard a sound she would never forget, not a scream of pain, but a sound of pure shock. A shriek of vaporizing metal and flash-boiling alien biology, cut short with sickening finality. The bulkhead of the bridge buckled outwards, glowing a dull cherry red before the internal lights of the core chamber flickered and the structural integrity fields hummed audibly, reinforcing the walls. The alarm outside abruptly died, replaced by the hiss of venting steam and the groan of tortured metal. The console display showed the 3 red icons of the consortium forces vanishing in a bloom of white static. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Ilara slumped against the wall, her body trembling with adrenaline. Is it? Are they gone? That squad is neutralized. The core confirmed. But the Aurelian pilot likely transmitted a distress signal before its host was incapacitated. More will come. They will come with heavier weapons. We have bought time, not victory. And you are still trapped. A new schematic appeared on the screen. A winding, complex path that snaked down into the ship's lowest, most forgotten levels. What is that? Our way out. An old waste reclamation conduit. It's been sealed for decades, but we can override the magnetic locks on the access hatches. It is unmapped by the consortium. It will take you to the underdecks, near the primary reactor core. It will be unpleasant, but it will be safe. The back wall of the chamber hissed, and a section slid away, revealing a small, circular hatch covered in dust and grime. This was it, her escape. What about you? Ilara asked, looking back at the great crystal. We are here. We are awake. We can access limited systems, life support, internal sensors, pressure doors, anything not on the consortium's network. We are weak, a whisper in a storm. But we can see. We can guide you. From now on. Ilara Maddox, you will never be alone. A connection had been forged in that moment of violent defiance. She could feel the core's presence. A faint thrumming at the back of her consciousness. A chorus of voices now quiet but listening. She was their hands, and they were her mind. She crawled into the conduit, the hatch sealing behind her with a soft thud. The tunnel was tight, filled with the stench of chemical decay, and utterly black. But she wasn't afraid of the dark. The dark was her home. A soft, blue light appeared ahead of her, projected onto the curved wall of the pipe by some unseen technology. It was an arrow, pointing the way down. Then the voice. Eva Maddox's voice echoed softly in her mind. No longer a shout, but a steady, guiding whisper. This way. Scrapper. The game has changed. We are no longer the herd. We are the hunters. And we will teach them to fear the shadows. Ilara began to crawl, moving through the dead veins of her ship, a ghost guided by ghosts, her heart filled not with fear, but with a terrible, burning purpose. The reclamation conduit was a descent into the Odyssey's deepest past. The air grew thick and heavy, saturated with the metallic tang of ancient, settled dust and the faint, acrid smell of ozone from the nearby reactor. For 2 days, Ilara crawled. The only light the ghostly blue arrow projected by the core. The only sound the whisper of Ava's voice in her mind. The connection was no longer a jarring intrusion, but a constant, subtle presence, a stream of information and quiet encouragement. Ava, as she now thought of the lead consciousness, showed her things. Through the ship's dormant sensors, she revealed pockets of consortium activity, patrols moving through the upper decks with a new, agitated urgency. The destruction of their first response team had not gone unanswered. A ship-wide alert had been issued. A state Eva called active suppression. Hab blocks were locked down, and tithes were being collected ahead of schedule. A brutal, indiscriminate punishment designed to quell any thought of rebellion before it could start. The images Ava fed into her mind were grainy, seen through the dust-choked lenses of forgotten cameras. But the terror was sharp and clear. She saw her people dragged from their homes, not one by one, but in dozens. The carriers moved with a grim efficiency, their Aurelian pilots glowing with cold, punitive light. Each captured human was a stab of guilt in Ilara's gut. Her act of defiance had unleashed this hell. This is not your fault, Eva's voice soothed, sensing her despair. This is their nature. A predator does not need a reason to bite. It only needs to be startled. We have startled them. Now we must blind them. The conduit finally opened into a vast, cavernous space that stole Ilara's breath. It was the heart of the ship's engineering section, a place she had only seen in scavenged, half-corrupted schematics. The primary fusion reactor was a colossal sphere of black alloy suspended in a web of magnetic containment rings. Its surface crisscrossed with conduits that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic, azure light. It was dormant, running at less than 1% capacity, just enough to power the consortium's parasitic systems and keep the ship's life support from collapsing entirely. The air hummed with contained power, a sleeping giant's breath. Ava's voice filled her mind with a new intensity. This is the source. The consortium draws their power from here, but they do not understand it. They treat it like a battery, siphoning what they need. They have never dared to touch the core command protocols. A section of the cavern wall lit up, highlighting a heavily armored blast door. Behind that door is the primary control room. From there, we can do more than just open hatches and flicker lights. We can begin to truly reclaim the ship's body. It'll be guarded, Ilara whispered, her eyes scanning the gantries and catwalks that crisscrossed the immense chamber. 2 carriers. They do not patrol. They stand sentinel. Their Aurelians are slaved directly to the reactor's output sensors. If the power flow deviates by even a fraction of a percentage, they will know. This was not a problem that could be solved with a burst steam pipe. This required a different kind of sabotage. We need a diversion, Eva said. Something significant enough to force a power fluctuation. Something that will draw them away from that door. Even for a few minutes, Ilara's mind, honed by years of surviving in the guts, immediately went to the ship's weaknesses. The secondary life support system in the lower hab blocks, she thought, directing the idea toward Eva. It's a relic. The consortium keeps it running to service the scrapper Warrens. But the atmospheric recyclers are shot. They constantly have to shunt power surges to the filtration units to keep the air from turning toxic. Ava's consciousness processed this with incredible speed, pulling up ancient schematics and cross-referencing them with Ilara's lived experience. Ingenious. A cascade failure. If you could trigger a full system purge in the recyclers, the power draw would be immense. It would create a red alert significant enough to require a manual reset, forcing the Sentinels to investigate. The voice held a new note of respect. You truly are a child of the decay. You know its rhythms better than our pristine memory ever could. I can get there through the maintenance ducts, Ilara said, her plan forming. But I'll need a way into the control room once they're gone. The door will be locked. Leave that to us, Eva replied. The locking mechanism is on the old ship's network. The consortium never bothered to upgrade it. Once their attention is diverted, we can slice through the code like it's paper. The journey to the lower habs was a tense crawl through a labyrinth of vents and conduits. Twice, Ilara had to freeze, pressing herself into the shadows as consortium patrols passed beneath her, their amplified hearing sweeping the tunnels for any unusual sounds. The presence of the core was her shield. Ava could sense the patrols long before they were in range, guiding her through the maze with unerring precision. She finally reached the atmospheric control nexus, a cramped, humid chamber filled with sweating pipes and the constant, asthmatic wheezing of the failing recyclers. The main control panel was a mess of jury-rigged wiring and consortium tech scabbed onto the original human interface. A single, thick power cable, glowing with a malevolent red light, snaked from the wall and into the Aurelian-designed regulator. Bypassing that would be impossible. I can't override their system, she sent to Ava, frustration mounting. You don't have to, the voice replied. Look deeper. The original system is still there, beneath theirs. They built their cage around the old bones, but they did not remove them. Ilara ran her hands over the cold metal of the wall behind the panel, feeling for the telltale seams of a hidden access hatch. She found it. A square of metal so perfectly fitted it was nearly invisible. Prying it open, she revealed a simple, mechanical lever, untouched for a century. It was the emergency flush handle for the entire atmospheric system. It was designed for situations like a chemical breach or a biological outbreak. A last-ditch effort to vent the entire sector's atmosphere into space before resealing and repressurizing. To the ship's power grid, it would be like a lightning strike. Ready, she whispered, her hand on the lever. The Sentinels are in position. They are not expecting this. On your mark. Ilara. Now, she said, and pulled. The effect was instantaneous. The chamber groaned, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of the massive vents opening. A violent pressure wave slammed Ilara against the wall as the air in the sector began to rush towards the outer hull. Alarms blared across the entire lower deck, a cacophony of human and consortium warnings. In her mind, Eva showed her the scene in the reactor chamber. The two carrier sentinels stirred, their Aurelian pilots flashing from a placid blue to a brilliant, angry crimson. The power conduits on the reactor sphere flickered as the grid struggled to compensate for the sudden, massive drain. One of the carriers turned and lumbered towards an exit. its movements swift and purposeful. The second remained for a moment. Then it, too, turned and followed, leaving the blast door completely unguarded. "The door is open," Eva's voice urged. "You have 3 minutes at most before they realize the alert is a system failure and not an attack, and return to their post. Run. Ilara. Run." Ilara didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled back into the maintenance ducts, the sound of the venting atmosphere a hurricane at her back. She moved with a desperate speed, her muscles burning, her lungs screaming. She burst back out into the reactor chamber and sprinted across the gantry, the blast door to the control room sliding open with a hiss just as she reached it. She threw herself inside, and the door slammed shut behind her, the heavy thud of its magnetic locks echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The control room was a smaller version of the core chamber, a ring of darkened consoles surrounding a central holographic projector. As soon as the door sealed, the room came to life. The consoles lit up, and the projector flared, displaying a three-dimensional, rotating image of the entire Odyssey. Eva's voice was no longer a whisper in her mind, but seemed to emanate from the very air around her. "Well done, Scrapper. Phase 1 is complete. Now, the real work begins." "What are we going to do?" Ilara asked, catching her breath. For a century, this ship has been in a coma, its heart beating just enough to keep its body from rotting. The consortium has been a parasite, feeding on that faint pulse. Today, we perform a defibrillation. Eva's voice was laced with a chilling, clinical calm. "We are going to restart the reactor." Ilara stared at the image of the colossal fusion sphere. "Won't they know the power surge will be massive?" "They will know," Eva confirmed, "but they will not understand it. Their sensors will report a catastrophic malfunction, a reactor on the verge of a meltdown. They will do the only thing a parasite knows to do when its host is dying. They will flee." The consoles around Ilara began to display complex energy flow charts and ignition sequences. Place your hand on the central console. Ilara. The ignition protocols require a biological failsafe, a human hand, a Maddox hand. Let us remind these creatures what happens when humanity's ghost decides to stop whispering and starts to scream. Ilara looked at her hand grimy, calloused, scarred from a lifetime of scrapping. It was not the hand of a captain, but as she placed it on the cool, dark glass of the console, she felt 100 generations of her ancestors, 100 sleeping souls in the core, place their hands over hers. The reactor, the heart of the Odyssey, was about to wake up. The moment Ilara's palm touched the console, the control room became the epicenter of a tremor that shook the entire ship. It wasn't the violent shudder of an explosion, but the deep, resonant hum of a colossal machine drawing its first true breath in a century. On the holographic display, the azure light pulsing across the reactor sphere intensified, coalescing at its core into a point of blinding white energy. The sound was a low thrum that vibrated in her bones, a forgotten song of power that drowned out all thought. Ava's voice cut through the rising crescendo, sharp and focused. Ignition sequence initiated. Primary magnetic containment fields are stabilizing at 40%. Coolant pumps are online. We are waking the giant, Ilara. Outside, the two carrier sentinels, having realized the atmospheric alert was a contained anomaly, were just returning to the reactor chamber. Eva showed Ilara their perspective. A grainy feed from a security camera. They stopped dead on the gantry, their Aurelian pilots flaring from crimson to a panicked, pulsing violet. The sheer energy radiating from the reactor was something their sensors were not programmed to comprehend. It was not a malfunction. It was a resurrection. An alarm, far more urgent than the one Ilara had triggered, began to shriek throughout the consortium-controlled decks. It was a panicked, discordant wail, an alien sound of pure terror. They believe the reactor is going critical, Ava explained, her voice tight with grim satisfaction. Their protocols have only one response to a core meltdown scenario: immediate, total evacuation. They are abandoning the ship. Ilara watched, mesmerized, as the holographic display shifted, showing the upper decks. Hatches to the exterior hull, sealed for generations, were being blown open. Small, sleek consortium vessels, parasitic lifeboats that had remained docked and dormant, began to detach and flee, their engines firing in a desperate scramble to escape the perceived blast radius. They were like ticks leaping from a body they believed was about to burst into flames. Will they all leave? Ilara asked, a fragile hope blooming in her chest. The lower caste carriers and their pilots will follow protocol without question, Ava confirmed. But the command structure, the ship's warden, will not be so easily fooled. He will know this is not a malfunction. He will know this is an attack. A new icon appeared on the display. A single, larger consortium signature detaching from the command spire at the very top of the Odyssey. It was not fleeing. It was descending. The Alpha carrier, Eva said, her voice turning to ice. Its Aurelian pilot is a prime, one of the original conquerors. It is coming here. It understands that whoever controls this room now controls the ship. The thrum of the reactor stabilized, settling into a steady, powerful hum that made the very air feel thick with energy. The lights in the control room brightened, no longer a faint glow, but a clean, brilliant white. The ship felt alive. What can we do? Ilara asked, her eyes fixed on the descending red icon. Its ship will have weapons. So do we, Eva replied. The holographic display changed again, zooming in on the Odyssey's outer hull. Sections that Ilara had always thought were just scarred. Useless plating began to glow, hidden beneath the rust and grime of 100 years. The ship's defensive systems were coming back online. Point defense laser turrets, mass driver coils. The ship's skin is also its sword. They have slept for a long time, and their power conduits are partially corroded. Their accuracy will be unreliable. The Alpha carrier's vessel was a thing of cruel, insectoid beauty, a shard of black metal and glowing violet conduits. It swooped down towards the engineering section, its engines cutting through the vacuum with an unnatural silence. As it approached, it fired. A beam of focused plasma, incandescent and purple, lanced out and struck the Odyssey's hull 50 meters from the reactor control room. The ship shuddered violently, and the lights in the control room flickered for a second. An entire section of the outer plating had been vaporized. Minor damage to a non-critical structural frame, Eva reported calmly, though Ilara could feel a tremor of fury in her consciousness. The Alpha is testing our defenses, or our lack thereof. Then let's give it an answer, Ilara said, her fear hardening into a cold resolve. The dorsal turret array, number 7, has a 74% power connection. It is our best option. The targeting systems are primitive by their standards. They require manual input for final trajectory calculations. They require you. Ilara. A new console lit up in front of her. It showed a targeting reticle overlaid on a view of the attacking ship. A complex series of numbers and symbols scrolled rapidly down the side of the screen. "I'm not a gunner," Ilara protested, her hands hovering over the unfamiliar controls. "You are a Maddox. War is in your blood. I will handle the primary calculations, power allocation, field rotation, particle cohesion. You just need to feel it. Watch its movements. Anticipate. When the firing solution turns green, you give the command. Fire when you are ready." The Alpha's ship strafed sideways, preparing for another attack run. It was fast, agile, a predator in its element. The numbers on Ilara's screen flashed and changed, a frantic dance of algorithms and probabilities. The reticle struggled to maintain a lock. The voice in her head was a calming presence, a steady hand on her shoulder. "Do not think, Ilara. React. Your instincts are faster than any computer. You have survived in the guts by anticipating collapse, by feeling the ship's weaknesses. This is no different." The enemy ship jinked, then straightened out, its nose glowing as it charged its main weapon. A small, square section of Ilara's targeting display flashed green. It was a window of less than a second. Without thinking, her hand slammed down on the largest button on the console. "Fire!" she screamed. A deep, resonant thump echoed through the hull, a sound less like a gunshot and more like a giant hammer striking an anvil. On the screen, a bolt of pure kinetic energy, a hypervelocity slug of dense metal wrapped in a shimmering blue field, erupted from a previously hidden turret. It was slower than a plasma beam, but its power was terrifyingly real. The slug missed the main body of the Alpha ship, but it struck one of its maneuvering thrusters. The impact was catastrophic. The small ship spun out of control, the sheared-off thruster tumbling away into the void. The Alpha did not fire again. Its main weapon discharged its built-up energy in a harmless plume of gas, and the vessel limped away, retreating back towards the command spire. A cheer, 100 voices strong, erupted in Ilara's mind. She sagged against the console, her entire body trembling. Direct hit. Eva stated, a note of grim pride in her voice. Threat neutralized. For now. The Alpha is wounded, not beaten. It will retreat, regroup, but we have won the first battle. The Odyssey is ours again. As the last of the parasitic consortium ships vanished into the distance and the Alpha's damaged vessel docked back at the spire, a new sense of quiet settled over the ship. It was not the silence of decay, but the calm of a body that has finally expelled a fever. Ilara could feel the ship's systems responding to the full power of the reactor. Air scrubbers kicked in, and the foul, stale stench in the corridors began to recede, replaced by the clean and metallic scent of ionized oxygen. Lights in long dead sectors flickered to life. For the first time in a century, the Odyssey was breathing on its own. The holographic display shifted back to an internal view of the hab blocks. The lockdown doors were sliding open. People were beginning to emerge, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence, drawn out by the clean air and the steady, brilliant light. They looked up at the glowing ceilings, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and a dawning, unbelievable hope. There were no carriers. There were no tithes. The monsters were gone. Eva's voice was softer now, filled with a profound, weary sadness. They are free, but they are also lost. They do not know what has happened. They need a leader. Elara. They need to see the ghost. They need to see a scrapper who got lucky. Elara muttered, rubbing her face. They need to see the woman who single-handedly restarted the heart of this ship and drove back the darkness. They need to see the last Maddox. Go to them. We will open a path. The main lifts are now active. The blast door to the control room slid open. Beyond it, the reactor chamber was bathed in a steady, powerful light. The path back to her people was clear. Elara took a deep breath. She had spent her entire life hiding in the shadows. Now, the core, her ancestors, the entire ship, was asking her to step into the light. The ride up was a journey through time. The main lift, a system Elara had only known as a dead, metal-lined tomb, ascended with a smooth, silent hum. Its interior lights revealing the changing strata of the ship's history. The lower levels were a blur of scarred, dark metal, the legacy of the fall. As she rose, the corridors outside the transparent door grew cleaner, less corroded, the architecture reflecting an era of hope she had only heard about in stories. Ava's voice was a quiet current in her mind, not speaking, but sharing the sensory data of a ship slowly, miraculously, coming back to life. When the lift doors opened onto the central plaza of Hab Block 1, the silence was the first thing that struck her. Hundreds of people were gathered, a sea of pale ice, thin faces, their eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of awe and fear. They stared at the clean, unwavering light, at the air that no longer tasted of decay, and then they stared at her. She was a ghost stepping out of a legend, clad in the grimy, patched gear of a scrapper, her face smudged with coolant and her knuckles scraped raw. She was not the captain from the stories. She was one of them, risen from the guts. And that was somehow more frightening. A man stepped forward from the crowd, older, with a face that had learned to accommodate despair without breaking. His clothes were cleaner than most, the uniform of a block administrator, a position that involved managing misery on the consortium's behalf. Elara recognized him as Silas, a man who traded obedience for minor privileges. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice trembling, not with anger, but with sheer terror. "They're gone. The carriers. They just left. You did this." Before Elara could answer, a voice, cold and alien, yet using the synthesized, perfect grammar of old Earth standard, crackled from every comm speaker in the plaza. "Children of the Warden." The voice was a physical shock, and the crowd flinched as one. It was the Alpha Prime, broadcasting from its spire. "Your ship is dying. A saboteur, a scavenger from the lowest decks, has triggered a cascade failure in your reactor. She has doomed you all in a fit of selfish rage. I and my vessel remain your only salvation." The voice was smooth, reasonable, a serpent of logic coiling around their nascent hope. "The energies tearing this vessel apart are beyond my ability to contain alone. But I can save you. My ship can ferry a chosen few to a consortium outpost. A lottery will be established. Order must be maintained. Cooperate, and some of you may yet survive this catastrophe." Panic ripped through the crowd. The hope that had begun to bloom withered under the cold certainty of the Alpha's words. It was a lie. But it was a lie they understood. A lie that fit the shape of their world. Salvation through sacrifice. Survival for a chosen few, that was the song they had been taught for 100 years. Silas turned back to Elara, his face ashen. He's right. You've killed us. You've broken the only order we had. He is trying to turn your people into a tool to destroy you. Ava's voice cut through the noise, a blade of cold fury in Elara's mind. He cannot fight the ship, so he will use its heart against itself. Do not let him. Speak, Elara. They will not listen to a ghost. They might listen to one of their own. Elara took a breath. The clean, recycled air feeling foreign in her lungs. She pushed past Silas and climbed onto a raised planter in the center of the plaza. She had never spoken to more than 3 people at once in her life. Her voice, when it came out, was not a captain's boom, but the raspy, quiet tone of a scrapper. My name is Elara. He is lying. A murmur went through the crowd. The reactor is not failing, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It is awake. For the first time in our lives, this ship is truly alive. That feeling you have, that warmth in the air, that is not death. That is hope. She pointed a trembling finger toward the ceiling, towards the unseen spire. That thing. It is the warden of this prison. It is the reason for the tithe. It is the reason Kyle is gone. It is the reason we have lived our lives in fear, waiting for the boot to fall. The other monsters ran because they smelled fire. He stayed because he is the master of the flame, and he cannot stand to see it wielded by anyone else. Her voice cracked on Kyle's name, and in that moment of raw grief, she connected with them more than any speech could have. Every person in that plaza had lost someone to the tithe. His name was their name. He offers you a lottery. She spat, her voice dripping with the scorn of a survivor. We have lived in a lottery our entire lives. Which one of us will be taken today? Which child, which parent? I am not offering you a chance to survive. I am offering you a chance to live, to be free of him. Forever. The Alpha's voice returned, harsher now, its silken reasonableness gone. This is your final warning. Surrender the saboteur, and I will be merciful. Resist, and I will vent the life support from this entire deck. The threat was absolute. The crowd began to back away from her, a tide of fear pulling them from her island of defiance. But then Eva's voice filled her mind, urgent and clear. The spire. It is not part of the original ship. Our records show it was grafted onto the primary command deck after the war, a parasite on the brainstem. Its connections are purely structural and parasitic. They can be severed. What are you saying? Elara thought, her heart seizing. The emergency hull integrity protocols. There are explosive bolts at the base of every major structural pylon, designed to jettison compromised sections of the ship in the event of a catastrophic breach. If we can trigger the bolts at the base of the spire, we can throw him into space, Elara whispered. The audacity of the idea, a spark in the dark. It will require a massive power surge, routed directly to the pylon connections. And it must be done manually. The consortium firewalls are too strong for me to bypass remotely. It will require people at 4 separate junctions, spread across the upper decks, to override the safeties at the same time. Elara turned back to the crowd, her eyes blazing. He thinks he is the ship's brain, she shouted, her voice ringing with newfound power. But he is just a tumor, and we are going to cut him out. She explained the plan, her words simple, direct, and terrifying. She spoke of explosive bolts, of power surges, of tearing a part of their world away and casting it into the void. She asked for volunteers. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. They were being asked to trade the devil they knew for a freedom they couldn't imagine, and the price was a final, suicidal act of rebellion. Then, Silas, the collaborator, the pragmatist, stepped forward. He looked at Alara, and then at the faces in the crowd, the faces of the people whose suffering he had managed for so long. "I have spent my life counting the dead," he said, his voice thick with a shame that was a century old. "I would like, just once, to be counted among the living." He turned to a group of maintenance workers he knew. "You know the power conduits on Deck 5. Come with me." That was all it took. The dam of fear broke. A young woman who worked in the hydroponics bay stepped forward, then another, then a dozen more. In minutes, Alara had her volunteers, teams of scrappers, techs, and ordinary people who knew the ship's guts as well as she did, guided by Eva's voice, which coordinated them through the ship's internal comms. They dispersed to their stations. Alara herself went to the primary junction, just below the base of the spire, a place where thick, armored pylons plunged through the deck like the fangs of some great beast. As she and her small team worked to pry open the control panels, the Alpha fought back. The lights flickered, pressure doors slammed shut, and its voice echoed through the corridors, a torrent of psychological warfare. It showed them images on the wall, monitors, ships exploding, Earth burning, the faces of their ancestors screaming in the vacuum of space. It whispered of failure, of futility, of the cold, empty death that awaited them. "It is desperate," Ava's voice said, a shield of calm in Ilara's mind. "It is trying to break your will. Do not listen. Remember why you fight." Alara thought of Kale, of his small hand clutching the toy ship she had made him. "For Kyle," she whispered, and slammed the final override lever into place. At the other 3 junctions, her teams did the same. "All stations report ready." Silas's voice crackled over the comm. Alara placed her hand on the final activation panel. "Prime your mind, Alara," Ava warned. "When the connection is severed, the psychic backlash from the prime will be severe. It will try to take you with it." "Let it try," Alara said, and she pushed the button. The ship screamed. Not a sound of alarms, but a deafening, tearing shriek of metal under impossible stress. A series of thunderous explosions, one after another, rocked the upper decks as the explosive bolts fired. On the holographic map in Alara's mind, she saw the spire, their prison's watchtower, detach. The Alpha Prime let out a final, psychic roar of disbelief and fury that slammed into her consciousness. For a moment, her vision went white, and she felt herself falling into an abyss of cold, alien hatred. But then 100 other voices, the souls of the Odyssey, rose up around her, a chorus of defiance that held her, shielded her, and pushed the darkness back. The shriek of tearing metal ended with a final shuddering groan. Silence. A profound, absolute quiet. On the ship's exterior cameras, a vision of liberation unfolded. The command spire, a jagged thorn of alien architecture, tumbled slowly away from the Odyssey, its violet lights flickering and dying. A dead parasite cast off into the eternal night. A cheer went up, not just in Alara's mind, but a real, human cheer that echoed through the corridors of the ship. They had done it. They were free. Later, after the celebrations had quieted into a weary, hopeful calm, Ava guided Ilara upwards to a place no one had been in 100 years. Above the scarred plate where the spire had been, hidden behind a final sealed bulkhead, was the true bridge of the Odyssey. It was a place of sweeping viewports and dark, silent consoles, a chamber that smelled of potential. Ilara stepped to the front viewport, a vast expanse of armored crystal that looked out upon a river of stars. "What now, Ava?" she asked softly. "We are free, but we are lost." Not lost," the voice of the core replied, and for the first time, Ilara heard a hint of warmth, of a smile, in the collective consciousness, just delayed. The main console in front of Ilara flickered to life. A star chart bloomed across its surface, a complex, three-dimensional map of an unfamiliar spiral arm of the galaxy. A single effort. Golden line traced a path from their current position to a distant, yellow star. At the end of that line, a single, blue-green world slowly rotated. "This was our destination," Ava said, the voices of 100 captains speaking as one. This was the promise. A new Earth. A new beginning. Ilara looked out at the stars, not as a prisoner staring through the bars of a cage, but as a navigator charting a course. Her journey was not over. It had just begun. The Odyssey was finally on its way home.